My name is Paula Blake. I'm 63 years old, and the day my husband died. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me and others what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late. Share it in the comments below. Thanks. I learned something painful. I found out just how little my children really cared about us. That morning started like any other, or at least it tried to. I was holding a mug of instant coffee, already thinking about which pills Thomas needed that day. When I walked into the living room, I saw him leaning to the side in his recliner, one hand resting on his chest. At first, I thought he was just asleep. I called his name, but he didn't answer. I put my coffee down hard enough that some of it splashed out and went to shake his shoulder. First gently, then harder. That's when I realized he was cold. I didn't panic, not right away. Thomas was always the calm one. Even when life got messy, he kept his head, and I guess some of that calm rubbed off on me. I called 911 and told them what happened. The woman on the line asked if I could try CPR, but I knew it was too late. I'll never forget how strange my own voice sounded when I said, "No, he's already gone," like someone else was speaking through me. The paramedics came, confirmed he'd passed, and handed me paperwork I could barely hold on to. The pen felt too small, my hand too heavy. When they left, the silence in the house felt bigger than anything I'd ever known. I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I called my children. I started with Allison, my oldest. She's always acted like the one in charge, even when she wasn't. Her phone rang so long I thought it would go to voicemail, but she finally picked up. She sounded busy, like she was doing something else while waiting for me to talk. I said, "Allison, it's Mom. I need you to listen." She said, "Okay," like she was waiting for me to ask her to pick up milk. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Your father died this morning. I found him in his chair." There was a pause, and then she said, "Oh my God, Mom, that's awful." But her voice felt hollow, like she was just saying the words. Then, without even letting it sink in, she started rambling about a family vacation they had just booked to Maui. "The kids have been looking forward to this for months," she said, "and it's all non-refundable. Do you know when the funeral might be?" I stared at the wall like I was talking to a stranger. I said, "Your father is dead, and you're worried about a vacation." She went quiet, then sighed and said, "I know you're upset, but this is thousands of dollars, and the kids will be heartbroken if we cancel." I didn't argue. I just said, "I'll let you know," and hung up before she could say anything else. My hand was shaking, but I kept going. Next was Brandon. He picked up after 2 rings, sounding distracted like he was reading emails while we talked. I said, "Brandon, it's Mom. I need you to listen." He said, "Yeah, what's going on?" I told him, "Your father died this morning." He muttered Jesus under his breath, then didn't say anything for a while. I waited, hoping he'd ask if I was okay, maybe say he was on his way. Instead, he said, "Well, this is really bad timing. I've got back-to-back client meetings all next week. When are you thinking for the service?" I felt something inside me break and sink so deep I didn't know if I'd ever feel it again. I said, "I don't know, Brandon. I haven't even had time to think about that." He sighed, like I was being difficult. "Okay, well, just let me know as soon as you pick a date. I'll try to move some things around, but no promises." Then he hung up. He didn't ask how I was, didn't even say sorry. Last, I called Courtney. She picked up on video, her face glowing from her laptop screen. When she saw my face, she asked, "Mom, what happened?" I didn't sugarcoat it. "Your father died this morning. I found him in his chair." She gasped, covered her mouth, and tears welled up in her eyes too fast, too perfect. "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry." But before I could even breathe, she launched into a story about their upcoming Disney trip. They'd made the reservations 6 months ago. Everything was paid for. "Could we maybe do something small now?" she asked, "and then a bigger memorial later when we get back." My lips pressed so tightly together I thought they might crack. I didn't answer right away because I knew if I spoke, I'd scream. Finally, I said, "I'll let you know," I said, and then I hung up. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring into nothing, and it hit me no one was coming. No one was going to show up, hold my hand, or tell me it would be okay. Thomas and I had spent our entire lives doing everything we could for our kids, helping with down payments, co-signing loans, paying for summer camps and college tuition. And now, when it mattered the most, they couldn't even cancel a vacation. I stood up and walked over to the counter where we kept the bills and grocery lists. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and wrote one word in big block letters, "Will I?" Underlined it 3 times. The second my pen touched the paper, my hand stopped shaking. That's when I knew if they couldn't bother to show up for their father's funeral, they weren't getting a single penny of what he left behind. And for the first time that day, I felt a strange sense of peace. Like the decision had already been made deep down, and now all I had to do was follow through. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Allison. "Hey Mom, just let us know what you decide about the funeral. We'll see what we can figure out." No apology, no "are you okay?" No offer to help, just cold, empty logistics. I didn't respond. I set the phone face down on the table, walked into the living room, and picked up Thomas's wedding ring from the little dish he always kept next to his chair. I held it so tight in my hand that my knuckles turned white. I could almost hear his voice again, saying, "People show you who they are when it counts." He was right. They had shown me, and now I had to show them what choices like that cost. I went back into the kitchen and called Russell, our lawyer. When he answered, I didn't bother with polite greetings. "Russell, I need you to come by tomorrow morning," I said. "We're rewriting everything." He paused, probably expecting me to change my mind or calm down, but I didn't. My voice was steady, sharper than I expected. "I'm done pretending they care. If they won't honor their father in death, they don't get to profit from his life." He said he'd be there at 9 a.m. after I hung up. I sat back down with the legal pad and started writing. I made a list of every account, every asset, every valuable thing in the house, neatly, row by row. Next to each item, I wrote, "Pending revision." By the time I finished, it was past midnight, but I wasn't tired. I felt wide awake, like a woman who had finally opened her eyes after years of sleepwalking. The next morning, I got up before the sun. I sat at the table with a fresh cup of coffee and read through my list again. I double-checked every number, every scribbled note about who borrowed what, when, and why. As I reread it all, I remembered the dozens of times we'd shown up for them without question. And yet now, they couldn't even be bothered to show up for one day. That thought didn't make me cry, it made my hands steady. At 8:50, Russell's car pulled up. I didn't bother straightening the kitchen or putting on a brave face. I opened the door before he knocked. He looked at me the way he had the night of Thomas's retirement party, like he didn't want to be the one to deliver hard news, but would if he had to. I motioned for him to sit at the table. I had already laid out every folder I could find, records, insurance papers, even the old notebook where Thomas kept track of household bills. Russell sat down carefully. "Paula," he said, "before we start, I want to say again how sorry I am. Thomas was the best man I ever knew." I nodded. There was nothing to say that would make it better, and I didn't have the strength to pretend there was. I pushed the legal pad toward him. "I'm not going to dance around this," I said. "I want the will rewritten with conditions." He glanced at the pad, then back at me. "What kind of conditions?" he asked, his tone careful. I didn't hesitate. "If they don't show up for their father's funeral, in person, they inherit nothing. No stand-ins, no excuses, no pushing the date to make room for trips. If they show up, fine, but the majority of the estate goes to Maria Ortiz." His eyebrows went up. I knew what he was thinking, that the kids would challenge it, that I might seem like I was acting out of grief, but I didn't care. Maria was here every single day since Thomas got sick. She was the one sitting with me the night he passed. She brought food when I couldn't eat. She stayed when no one else did. I will not leave everything to people who can't even bother to show up. Russell set his pen down and leaned back in his chair. "Paula, you understand they're going to challenge this. They'll say you were emotional, not thinking clearly." I looked him dead in the eye. I've never been more clear in my life. After that, he didn't argue. He opened his notebook and started writing. We spent nearly 3 hours going through every detail: house title, savings accounts, Thomas's pension. Every time he asked, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes." Eventually, he asked about the grandchildren. "Maybe," he said, "I'd want to set something aside for their education." I sat quiet for a moment, then nodded. "It's not their fault. Their parents are selfish. Set up a trust, just enough to cover college but nothing else." He nodded and kept writing. At one point, Maria came by to check on me, carrying a container of homemade chicken casserole. She spotted Russell sitting at the table and hesitated. Worried she was interrupting, but I waved her in and thanked her. She placed the food on the counter and gently asked if I needed anything else. I told her no, she'd already done more than enough. After she left, Russell looked up over his glasses. Does she know you're planning to leave her the estate? I shook my head. Not yet. I'm not telling her until it's done. She never asked for anything, and I don't want to make her feel uncomfortable. He tapped his pen against the pad, then said, Okay. So let me be sure I've got this right. You want the estate divided 30% in a trust for the grandkids, education, and 70% to Maria if your kids don't attend the funeral. But if they do attend, everything gets split equally, minus Maria's part. I corrected him. No, even if they show up, Maria still gets the house and half of what's left. They can split the rest. Showing up just out of guilt or duty isn't the same as being there when it counted. He nodded and made the final note. Then he began drafting the legal language. Hearing him read it out loud felt strange, like I was listening to someone summarize a movie about my life. But at the same time, it felt right, like I was finally doing what needed to be done, instead of smoothing things over for the sake of peace. When he finished, he slid the papers toward me. Do you want to take some time to read this alone? He asked. I shook my head. No. I picked up the pen and signed every page. My hand didn't shake once. Russell signed as a witness, then carefully placed everything into a manila envelope and wrote the filing details on the front. He looked up at me, his voice softer now. You know this will burn the bridge with them. I met his eyes and said, calmly, they lit the match when they chose a vacation over their father. After he left, I stayed at the table a while, just staring at the envelope. I thought about the day each of my children was born, every long hour of labor, those first moments holding them, the nights Thomas and I stayed up when they had fevers, the birthday parties we scraped to afford. We had tried so hard to be the kind of parents they could count on. But now it was clear we were only part of their lives when it was easy. My phone buzzed. Another text from Allison. Hey, any updates on the service? We're trying to figure out if we can move the flights. Not a single word asking how I was. Not 1 ounce of real care. I didn't answer. I turned the phone face down again. Then I got up and went to the cabinet above the stove where Thomas kept the important papers. I pulled out the old tin box with our wedding photo tucked inside and set it next to the envelope on the table. I stared at that photo a long time, tracing the worn edges with my fingers. I kept my promise, I whispered. They won't forget what matters. That evening, Maria came by again, this time with groceries. I thanked her and offered to pay her back for everything she'd been doing. She shook her head. You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Blake. I'm just glad you're not alone. I almost told her right then what I'd done, but something stopped me. Maybe I just wanted to hold on to the secret a little longer, let it settle in my chest. After she left, I poured myself a glass of water and sat back down at the table. The envelope sat beside me, and for the first time since Thomas passed, I didn't feel helpless. I felt like I was finally protecting what mattered to him: respect, loyalty, and the simple decency of showing up when it counts. The morning after I signed the new will, I woke up with a dull ache behind my eyes, like I'd spent the whole night holding my breath. I checked my phone, hoping just maybe there'd be a message from one of them that sounded real, a sign that they were thinking about something other than themselves. But there wasn't. Just a text from Brandon. Mom, we need to pick a date so we can finalize our plans. It was so casual, it made my stomach turn. I didn't answer right away. I made myself eat a piece of toast and drink some coffee first. I needed to be sure I wasn't replying out of anger. But as I sat there, I realized I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done pretending this was okay. Around 10 a.m., I called the funeral home and scheduled the service for June 15th at 10 a.m. The director, Mr. Willis, was gentle and respectful, but I kept my voice brisk. I needed it to feel like a transaction, not another emotional spiral. When I hung up, I sat quietly, thinking about how Thomas would have handled all this. He would have been disappointed but not surprised. He always said our kids were good people, in theory, not in practice. I used to argue with him about that. Now, I hated that he'd been right. I picked up the phone again and called Allison first, since she always acted like she was in charge. She answered quickly, sounding rushed, and immediately launched into a list of reasons why rescheduling the funeral would be best for everyone. I cut her off. The funeral is June 15th at 10 a.m. at Green Lawn Memorial. You and your siblings need to be there. She went quiet. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she understood how serious this was. But then she said, dramatic, annoyed, "Mom, are you really going to do this while we're trying to plan a trip? You know how hard it is to coordinate for kids and 2 jobs. This is just bad timing." And yet, my voice didn't even waver when I said, "I'm not interested in whether the timing is convenient for you. Your father deserves better than excuses." Allison started to push back, but I cut her off. "I need to call your brother," I said, and I hung up before she could keep talking. I called Brandon next. I could hear voices in the background. He was clearly in a meeting, but I didn't care. "Brandon, the funeral is set. June 15th at 10 a.m. I expect you to be there." He cleared his throat. "Mom, I told you this week is impossible. I'm presenting to the board Thursday, flying cross-country for a funeral. I haven't even had time to process. It's not going to help anyone." I closed my eyes and counted to 3, so I wouldn't explode. Then I said calmly, "You will find a way. This is not optional." He muttered something under his breath. "What was that?" I asked. He repeated it. "You're being manipulative." My jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. If expecting you to come bury your father is manipulative, then I honestly don't know what to say to you. He gave me the same empty answer, "I'll see what I can do," which meant absolutely nothing. I hung up before he could say another word. Finally, I called Courtney. She answered on video, like she always does. Her face already blotchy with tears. She could turn on quicker than anyone I've ever known. "Mom, please," she begged. "Can't we find a way to make this work for everyone? The kids will be crushed if we have to cancel Disney." I just stared at her. Did she even hear herself? She sounded like a teenager whining about missing prom. "I'm not moving the funeral so you can go ride roller coasters," I said. "If you don't come, then don't. But understand this, you will regret it." She started crying harder. I didn't move. I'd heard enough tears that week to last a lifetime. "Please don't do this to us," she sniffled. I almost laughed. She still thought this was about her. "You've made your priorities clear," I said, and I hung up. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed, again a group video call. Allison, Brandon, and Courtney. I thought about ignoring it, but something in me wanted to see their faces one last time, just to know I wasn't imagining it all. When I answered, their faces popped up in little boxes. Allison looked annoyed. Brandon wouldn't look at the screen, and Courtney was still dabbing at her eyes. Allison spoke first. "Mom, we need to talk about this like adults. We can't be expected to turn our lives upside down with 3 days' notice." I said, "Your father died. That's the only notice you get." Brandon jumped in. "This isn't fair. You're acting like we don't care. We're just trying to be realistic about what we can do." Something in me snapped. "Realistic," I said. "Realistic would have been showing up when your father needed you. Realistic would have been calling to check on me instead of sending texts about flight vouchers. Realistic would be admitting this is inconvenient and you just don't want to come." Courtney sobbed. "That's not true. We love you." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Then act like it. They all fell silent. Finally, Allison said, "If you force this, you're going to ruin whatever relationship we have left." I looked at her face, the same face I had kissed goodnight for 18 years and felt nothing. "If this is what it takes to make you show up," I said, "then maybe the relationship isn't worth saving." Brandon closed his eyes, looking tired. Just like his father used to say, he could never handle confrontation. "We'll see what we can do," he mumbled, and then he ended the call. Courtney followed. Allison lingered for a second longer, her mouth tight. "You're making a mistake," she said. "No," I told her, "I'm correcting one." When the screen went black, I sat at the kitchen table feeling more exhausted than I could ever remember, but also more sure of myself than I had in years. Later that afternoon, Maria came by to help me clean out the pantry. She didn't ask questions. She just knew I needed to do something with my hands. When I told her about the funeral plans, she nodded quietly and said, "He deserves to be honored properly." She'd been here every single day making sure I ate, sitting with me during the long, quiet evenings. She never once made me feel like a burden. She had shown up in ways my own children hadn't. When she left, I sat down again at the kitchen table, opened the calendar, and circled June 15th in bright red ink. I stared at that date until my eyes blurred and whispered, "This is when it ends." I knew they'd show up eventually, whether out of guilt or because they were afraid of what it would look like if they didn't. But no matter what stories they told, themselves or me. I had already seen the truth. They'd shown me what mattered to them, and I wasn't going to forget it. The days between setting the funeral date and actually getting through it felt endless. Each morning I woke up with the same heavy weight in my chest. And no matter how many lists I made or how many cabinets I cleaned out, that feeling never lifted. I spent most of that long, quiet week going over little things, details I knew Thomas would have cared about. I made sure the funeral program included his favorite hymn, and I told the florist to use blue hydrangeas instead of white lilies because Thomas always said lilies felt cold, like flowers you sent to strangers, not to someone you loved. Maria came by every evening after seeing her other clients. She sat with me while I filled out paperwork and made call after call. She didn't say much, but her presence said more than any words could. She was the only person in my life at that moment who genuinely cared how I was doing, not how much the arrangements were going to cost or what inconvenience they might cause. The night before the funeral, I laid out my black dress and the necklace Thomas had given me on our 30th anniversary. Then I sat alone in the living room, holding the folded flag the VA had sent me. I just wanted to feel something that still belonged to him, something real, one more time. That morning, I got up before the sun. I showered, forced myself to eat a slice of toast even though my throat felt too tight to swallow. By the time Maria arrived to help me load the car, I felt like I hadn't slept in days. We didn't talk on the drive. I kept turning one thought over in my mind. Would any of my children show up? Would they even bother? A part of me hoped they wouldn't because I didn't know if I had it in me to look them in the eyes and pretend to believe the excuses they'd practiced. When we pulled into the funeral home parking lot, I saw Allison's SUV already there. For a moment, my stomach dropped. Some small, aching part of me still wanted to believe she might be the daughter I used to know, the one who sat at the kitchen table just to talk, who sent cards out of nowhere just to say she loved me. But when I walked inside and saw her standing stiffly near the sign-in table, arms crossed like a shield, I knew nothing had changed. She looked at me like she was bracing for a fight. I didn't give her one. I nodded politely and walked to the front where Thomas's casket sat, surrounded by the photos I had chosen. I placed the folded flag on top exactly how he would have wanted it. Brandon arrived 15 minutes late, glancing at his watch like he was timing the inconvenience. His suit still had the dry cleaner tag tucked inside the sleeve. He didn't even look at me, just gave a quick nod, like this was a business meeting he needed to get through. Courtney came last, with her husband following behind, carrying their youngest. She immediately started crying loudly, drawing attention as if that grief could undo everything else. I didn't move to comfort her. I just stood by the casket, one hand resting on the smooth wood, waiting for it all to begin. The service started right at 10 o'clock. Mr. Willis read the obituary. I had written myself I didn't trust anyone else to get it right. While he spoke, I watched my children from the corner of my eye. Allison kept checking her phone, like she had somewhere better to be. Brandon shifted in his seat, sighing, as if bored. Courtney clutched a tissue, crying quietly, but she didn't look at the casket once. And somehow, in that moment, I felt an unexpected calm settle over me, because right there, in front of everyone, they made it clear, this day didn't mean much to them. That truth made my decisions feel justified. No one could say I was acting out of spite. They'd already shown the world exactly how little this meant to them. After the service, people I hadn't seen in years came to offer condolences, old friends, neighbors, people who had worked with Thomas at the plant. Women from church hugged me and told me how he'd once fixed their cars or carried their groceries. And Maria stood in the back, quiet and steady, nodding now and then like she was silently reminding me that I wasn't as alone as I felt. When the crowd thinned, my children approached me together, like they'd planned a strategy. Allison spoke first, her tone low. Mom, I hope you understand how hard this has been for us. We had to cancel a lot of plans. I looked at her, not blinking. Your father died. That should have been all you needed to know. Brandon stepped forward, his hands stuffed into his pockets. We're here now. That's what matters. I almost laughed. We'll see, I said. Courtney wiped her eyes and whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I nodded, only because I didn't have the strength to say more. They didn't stay long. Within 15 minutes, they were back in their cars, driving away before I'd even finished gathering up the leftover programs and the guest book. Maria came up beside me, reaching for a stack of items to carry. I looked at her and felt a tightness in my chest, not from sadness, but from gratitude. "Thank you," I said softly, "for everything." She just squeezed my hand and smiled gently. "I'll follow you home." A visible relief on their faces, like they'd just passed a test they barely studied for. Brandon leaned back in his chair slightly, already relaxing. Courtney looked at her husband with wide eyes, as if to say, "See, we made it." Allison nodded to herself, almost smug, like she'd known all along she'd get her share. But then Russell kept reading. He explained that the house the home Thomas and I had built together, the place where we raised them, celebrated birthdays, and weathered storms would not be divided. It would go to Maria Ortiz. Maria, who had shown up, who had cooked, cleaned, comforted, and stayed, who never once asked what she was owed. The room changed in an instant. Allison's mouth dropped open slightly, and her eyes darted to mine like she was waiting for me to say it was a joke. Brandon sat up straight, the easy confidence gone, his fingers tightening around his tablet. Courtney's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time there was no sound, no dramatic sobbing, just silence. Real, heavy silence. Russell continued, his voice calm. "The remaining 20% of the estate," he said, "had been placed into a trust fund, earmarked for the grandchildren's future education. Not for trips, not for toys, just school, and nothing else." I sat still, watching their faces shift: confusion, disbelief, anger. All those years of entitlement unraveling in a few quiet sentences. They weren't prepared for this. They thought showing up late, out of obligation, would be enough. But it wasn't. When Russell finished, he closed the folder and looked at me. I gave a small nod, and then he turned to them. "These were your father's wishes, co-signed by your mother. There will be no renegotiation, no further discussion today." Allison spoke first, her voice sharp and cold. "This is completely inappropriate. You gave away our family home to the housekeeper." "She wasn't the housekeeper," I said quietly. "She was the only one who showed up." Brandon scoffed. "We were busy, Mom. We had lives. You can't expect us to drop everything." I cut him off. "Your father died. I expected nothing more than what he gave you, your whole life, respect and presence. He showed up. I did too. Maria did." Uberly. Courtney looked at me, tears slipping down her face. "But we're your children." I nodded. "Yes, and for a long time, I let that be enough, no matter how little you gave in return." "Not anymore." There was a beat of silence. Then Russell stood, collecting the papers and sliding them into his briefcase. "Copies of the will can be mailed to you directly. If you choose to contest, I advise you to retain your own counsel, though you should know it is airtight." No one said a word. Allison looked like she wanted to scream but couldn't find the right words. Brandon stared at the floor. Courtney just shook her head, stunned. I stood, smoothing the front of my blouse. "You're welcome to stay for coffee. Or you can go." No one moved, so I walked past them, into the kitchen where Maria was standing quietly, holding 2 mugs. "They didn't take it well, did they?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "No, but I didn't expect them to." She handed me a cup, and we stood there for a while in silence, sipping. Outside, I could hear the shuffle of shoes and the murmur of confused, angry voices as my children gathered their things. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt done. I'd honored my husband. I'd told the truth. And I had finally stopped pretending. I watched as a bit of relief started to show on Allison's face, like she thought everything was going to be okay. I let her believe that for a few seconds. Then Russell, the lawyer, gently set down the main packet of papers and picked up a smaller envelope. He handled it like it was something fragile or dangerous. "In addition to the standard shares," he said, "there's a separate gift Paula set aside. It's for the person she named as her main caregiver and companion during her time of grief." He looked up at me to confirm what he was about to say, and I gave him a small nod. Then his eyes scanned the room, and for the first time since they'd walked in, none of my children could meet my gaze. "Maria Ortiz," Russell said clearly, "has been named the beneficiary of the rest of the estate. That includes the house, the car, and all personal belongings not otherwise listed." The room went completely still. You could almost feel the silence pressing down like a heavy blanket. I watched their faces shift from shock to confusion to anger. Courtney spoke first. Her voice was sharp and low, like a hiss. "You're giving her everything." I didn't say a word. I knew Russell would explain it better than I ever could. "It was Paula's direct instruction," he continued. Maria is receiving this portion in recognition of her constant support, kindness, and help during the last weeks of Thomas's life and after. The decision is final. Brandon's face had gone pale. He stared at me like I'd betrayed him. You can't be serious, he said. You're leaving the house to someone who's not even part of our family. I looked him straight in the eye. I'm leaving it to the person who showed up when it mattered. Allison's eyes were filled with tears, but her face had hardened. We were here, she said quietly. Her voice shook. No, I said, still calm. You showed up because you didn't want it to look bad if you didn't. You came because you were afraid of losing something. I could see it in their eyes that the truth had hit them. Heavy, unavoidable. In the back corner, Maria had a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. She hadn't expected any of this. She tried to speak, but Russell gently raised a hand. There will be time for questions later, he told her. Brandon shot up so fast his chair clattered to the floor. He didn't bother picking it up. This is insane, he snapped. You're punishing us for having lives, for not being able to drop everything at once. I felt a deep, quiet disappointment settle inside me. The kind that doesn't leave. No, I said. I'm holding you accountable for how you chose to treat your father's death and my grief. Courtney was crying now, really crying, tears running down her face. Please, Mom, she whispered. We can fix this. Just don't do this. I thought of all the times I had believed them, all the times I convinced myself they'd grow up and care like they used to, but I couldn't lie to myself anymore. It's already done, I said. Russell started packing up the papers, sliding them into a folder with a final, quiet snap. You'll each get a copy of the documents, he said calmly. If you try to challenge this, there's already legal protection in place. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Then Allison finally looked at me and said, I hope you know you're destroying this family. I didn't flinch. I met her eyes and said, no, you destroyed it the moment you decided your vacation was more important than your father. And in that moment, I knew nothing I said would make them understand, and I realized I didn't need them to. They left the room one by one, not a single one looking back. Maria slowly walked up to me, her voice shaking. Mrs. Blake, I don't know what to say. I reached for her hand. You don't need to say anything, I told her. You were here. That's what matters. When the last door finally closed, a strange calm washed over me. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt certain I had done the right thing. The house felt different now. Not just empty, it had already felt empty without Thomas, but now it felt honest. Like I had finally let go of every lie I told myself about who my children were and what we meant to each other. I sat alone in the living room after Russell and Maria left, just staring at the chair Allison had been in. I remembered the way her face twisted when she realized she wasn't going to get what she thought she deserved. I thought about Brandon's anger and Courtney's tears, and I wondered if any of them would call that night to say something real, something that sounded even a little bit like regret. But deep down, I already knew the answer. I knew they wouldn't call, and I was right. By evening, the only message on my phone was a text from Courtney. It said, I hope you're happy. I stared at the screen, half expecting to feel guilt or sadness, but instead, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. I set the phone down and made myself a simple dinner, just like Thomas would have wanted. He always told me to take care of myself, to eat even when I didn't feel like it. And for the first time, it didn't feel like I was cutting them off out of anger. It felt like I was finally standing up for myself. The next morning, Maria came by to check in. She paused in the doorway when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee. Unsure if she was even welcome now that everything was official, I smiled and told her to come in. She slowly sat across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Then she looked straight at me and said softly, I don't know if I can accept all of this. It feels like ... too much. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Maria, you earned it. You were here when I needed someone. You were here when no one else cared. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I was just doing my job, she whispered. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. No, you weren't. You were being a friend. That's when she broke down. The tears came fast, and this time, something inside me broke too, but not in a painful way. It felt like a release, like I could finally breathe. Because in that moment, I knew I hadn't made a mistake by trusting her. And I knew she wasn't going to vanish now that the paperwork was done. After she calmed down, I told her she didn't have to rush into anything. She didn't have to move in or take anything she wasn't ready for. She could take her time, figure out what made sense. She nodded and said she'd think about it. Then she hugged me so tightly it made my chest ache in the best way. That afternoon, I sat down and started writing letters to each of my kids. Even if they never spoke to me again, I needed them to know why I did what I did. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told Allison that I'd spent years pretending her polite distance meant she was mature, when really, it just meant she didn't want to be involved. I told Brandon that his job titles and bonuses never meant as much to me as simply having him there, that I would have traded every one of his promotions just to have him show up when it counted. And to Courtney, I said her tears didn't move me the way she thought they did not, when her actions always proved she cared more about how things looked than how they were. I ended each letter with the same truth, that I loved them, but I couldn't keep rewarding their absence with silence. I sealed the letters and left them on the kitchen counter. I wasn't ready to send them. Maybe I would one day. Maybe I never would. For so long, I'd been scared of whether they thought I was a good mother. I obsessed over their approval. But in the end, none of that changed who they showed themselves to be when it truly mattered. I know Thomas would have stood by me. He always said loyalty can't be taught to adults. Either they learn it when they're young, or they never learn it at all. In the days that followed, I kept expecting someone to show up at my door angry, yelling, demanding I undo everything. But no one came. Allison sent a short email asking if I'd reconsider, saying we could have a civil conversation. I ignored it. Brandon sent nothing. Courtney texted again, a long message full of hurt, feelings, and guilt. But it read like something she wrote more for herself than for me. I didn't reply. Maria kept coming by, sometimes just to check on me for a few minutes, sometimes to sit with me in the quiet evenings so the house wouldn't feel so heavy. One afternoon, she offered to help me go through Thomas's clothes, and for the first time, that idea didn't make my chest tighten. So we did it slowly together. We made piles, one to donate, one to keep. She never rushed me, and when I needed a break, she sat with me, patient and quiet, until I could keep going. When we were done, I felt lighter, like I'd finally closed a door, gently, not slammed it shut. A week after the will reading, I asked Maria to come with me to the cemetery. We didn't talk much during the drive. When we got there, I carried a small bouquet and the folded flag, and we walked side by side to Thomas's grave. I knelt down, laid everything gently on the stone, and for the first time, I felt like I could really breathe. I told him I kept my promise, that I made sure our legacy wouldn't just be something they could collect and forget about. Maria stood quietly behind me, her hand on my shoulder. I wasn't alone. Before we left, I looked at his name on the stone one last time, and whispered, "We did it." Driving home, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel regret. I felt sure. I know what story my children will tell about me, that I was cold, that I gave everything to a stranger. But I also know the truth. I chose loyalty over obligation, honesty over appearances. I chose to honor the man I loved, instead of the kids, who only remembered him when it was convenient. And as I pulled back into the driveway, Maria still beside me, I understood something I never had before. Sometimes doing the right thing does look like betrayal to people who never showed up when it counted. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.